It was a Saturday morning. One of those rare weekends where everything felt normal. The kind of morning where you wake up and don't think twice about what's going on in the world around you. That's how I felt as I walked downstairs, ready to enjoy a quiet breakfast with my family. But when I saw the empty house and my daughter's room in disarray, something inside me twisted. The house felt off. And then the phone rang. The voice on the other end of the line made my heart sink. It was my wife's mother, frantic. She's gone. They're both gone. I can't get in touch with them. It's like they just vanished. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't right. I tried calling my wife, but the phone just rang, and there was no answer. I called her again and again, no response. I called my daughter's phone too, but it went straight to voicemail. A few hours passed and panic started to rise. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. My daughter, only 8, was with her mother the last time I'd seen them together. But now both of them were gone. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I was terrified. What could have happened to them? When my wife finally called, her voice trembled with fear. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. We went with him. And now, I don't know how it got out of hand. Please forgive me. She had taken my daughter with her, gone to her lover's house, and had disappeared for an entire day. I didn't know who this him was at that point, but I knew something was deeply wrong. She begged me to come, to pick them up, but I was no longer thinking clearly. My anger took over. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I involved the police. I couldn't let this go on without understanding what had happened. And when the police found them, things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. By the time the police arrived, I was already a nervous wreck. My wife and daughter were found, but the moment I laid eyes on them, I could see the guilt and fear in her eyes. My daughter clung to her mother, but I couldn't focus on her. My thoughts were consumed by the fact that my wife had just confessed to abandoning our child with another man. I demanded to know what had happened, but she could barely speak. We went to see him, she whispered, avoiding my gaze. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't know it would hurt you this much. I was beyond furious, but I needed to stay calm, to make sense of this madness. The police took both my wife and her lover down to the station for questioning. They found them at his house, where my wife had abandoned our daughter, leaving her alone in a stranger's house with no one to care for her. It was pure recklessness, a betrayal that cut to the core. But what shocked me even more was what they found next. The police discovered my wife's lover had left his laptop on the kitchen table when they arrived. It wasn't until they began going through it that the real horror came to light. A video, recorded just hours before the incident, was discovered in the man's files. The officers called me into the room. My hands were shaking as I sat in front of the screen. I didn't want to watch, but I had to know. I had to see the truth with my own eyes. As the video began to play, my heart sank. I watched, frozen in place, as the camera focused on my wife and her lover. My stomach twisted into knots as the camera angle shifted, showing something I never expected to see. My wife, the woman I trusted with my life, was in the middle of a scene I could barely comprehend. She was with him, but it wasn't just an affair. It was worse. They were involved in something much darker, something I had never imagined possible in my wildest dreams. There was a level of cruelty in the way they treated each other, and it made my blood run cold. And as the video continued, I saw something that made my heart stop. A part of my wife I had never seen before. She was not just cheating, she was willingly complicit in something unspeakable. This wasn't just a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was calculated, and it went far beyond anything I could have ever anticipated. The video haunted me for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the images replay in my mind, each one more disturbing than the last. My trust, my entire world, had been shattered. The woman I thought I knew, the mother of my child, had turned into someone unrecognizable. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't simply sweep it under the rug and pretend everything would be fine. This wasn't just an affair. This was something much darker, a betrayal that went against everything I had ever believed in. I knew then that I couldn't stay with her. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. She had made her choices, and they were choices that would haunt both of us for the rest of our lives. But what about my daughter? I couldn't just let her stay with her. I had to protect her. The love of my life, the one I had vowed to protect above all else, had been left in the hands of this man, this stranger, who had no regard for her safety or well-being. I knew what I had to do. I hired a lawyer and began the process of suing for full custody of my daughter. I wasn't going to let my wife raise her in this environment. She had proven to me that she wasn't capable of being the mother my daughter needed. Her actions had put everything at risk. I couldn't allow her to continue being a part of my daughter's life in any meaningful way. The divorce proceedings were grueling. It was clear from the beginning that my wife would fight for everything. She cried. She begged. She promised to change, to fix things, to make it all right. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was no going back from this. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I had to protect my daughter, and that meant standing up to my wife in ways I had never imagined. When it came time for the custody battle, I gave it everything I had. I knew that my daughter's future was at stake, and I couldn't afford to lose her to this toxic situation. The courtroom was tense. My wife tried to paint herself as the victim, as someone who had made a mistake and was now trying to make amends. But I knew better. And more importantly, the evidence was on my side. After what felt like an eternity, the judge's decision came down. I had won full custody of my daughter. My wife had lost, and though the victory felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, it also felt hollow. I had won the battle, but I had lost everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. The courtroom had barely settled when my ex-wife made one final desperate attempt to make things right. Or so she thought. She had already lost the custody battle. But something in her shifted the moment the judge made the ruling. She stared at me across the room, her eyes filled with a mix of hatred and helplessness. I could feel the anger and desperation radiating from her. But what she said next caught me completely off guard. "I'll fight for her," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "You think you've won, but you haven't seen anything yet. If I can't have her, no one will." The words were cold, chilling even. There was something in her tone that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the threat of losing her in a custody battle. This felt darker, more dangerous. It was as if she was planning something. She didn't look at me with defeat anymore. She looked at me with an unsettling certainty, like she was about to set something in motion that would take everything from me. I tried to shake off the unease, thinking it was just the emotional strain of the trial. She had just lost everything. Of course, she would lash out. But as I drove home that day, a sinking feeling gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. The following days felt strangely quiet. My daughter was finally safe with me, and the initial relief of winning custody began to fade into a quiet fear. I kept expecting her to show up, to somehow drag me back into the storm of her lies and manipulation. But she didn't. For weeks, it felt like everything was returning to normal, or so I thought. Then, late one night, I received an anonymous email. My heart dropped as I opened it. The email was filled with a video clip. My hands shook as I pressed play. At first, it seemed like just another mundane video, until I realized what I was watching. It was a recording of my ex-wife. But this time, there was no sign of the remorse I'd seen in the courtroom. She was with someone else, someone I didn't recognize, and they were whispering about getting revenge on me. The tone of their conversation was cold, calculating. It dawned on me then. She wasn't done. She had a plan, and it was more insidious than I could have ever imagined. This video was just the beginning. She had no intention of simply walking away. She was playing a game, and I was the target. After receiving that unsettling email, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. The video left me shaken, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I had been through so much already. But when I watched it again, I realized the words they were speaking weren't just about some petty revenge. They were talking about a deep, twisted plan to destroy me and take away everything I had worked for. My ex-wife, once the person I thought I knew and loved, was now the mastermind of a manipulative scheme. I couldn't ignore this anymore. It was clear to me now. This wasn't just about my daughter or some fleeting desire for revenge. No, it was much worse. She was systematically trying to ruin me. I decided to take action immediately. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper. I needed to know exactly who she was involved with, what her next move was, and, most importantly, how to protect myself and my daughter from her madness. The investigator didn't take long to uncover some shocking truths. It turned out that my ex-wife had been in contact with several unsavory individuals over the past few months. These weren't just friends or acquaintances. They were people with questionable connections to organized crime. At first, I couldn't comprehend it. My mind raced as the pieces fell into place. The sudden wealth she had flaunted, the mysterious late-night meetings, everything began to make sense. She was trying to make a deal with someone more powerful than I could have imagined. And in doing so, she had dragged my daughter into this toxic mess. The investigators' findings were clear. My ex-wife wasn't just manipulating me. She was playing a dangerous game. And I had become her pawn. The video I had received was her way of warning me that she was in control, that she wasn't finished with me. But what was her end game? What did she want from me? I knew I had to be smart, move quietly, and keep my emotions in check. Every decision now had to be calculated. I had to stay ahead of her, outsmart her, or risk losing everything. As the days went by, I noticed strange things happening around my house. Unmarked cars parked near my street. People I didn't recognize lingering near my office. It felt like she was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension was palpable, and I knew that every moment counted. The walls were closing in, and I was running out of time to make my next move. It had been weeks since I first received that email, and things had only escalated. My life had become a constant state of alert. Every strange noise, every unfamiliar face on the street made my heart race. The feeling of being hunted was inescapable, and yet I couldn't let it show. I had to remain composed for my daughter's sake, and for the stability I'd fought so hard to build. Then, the phone call came. It was late, around midnight. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. My gut instinct told me it was her, my ex-wife. But I answered it anyway, heart pounding in my chest. "Do you really think you can take everything from me?" Her voice was cold, mocking, and familiar in the worst possible way. "I'm not done with you. You think the courts are going to save you? Think again." I felt my blood run cold as she continued speaking, detailing how she'd been moving pieces behind the scenes, finding new allies, manipulating the legal system, and even looking for ways to ruin my career. This wasn't just a custody battle anymore. This was a full-scale war, one she intended to win at all costs. "You'll regret underestimating me," she said before hanging up abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence. But this wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. She had made it clear that she was going to destroy everything I held dear. And I was running out of time. The next few days were a blur. I kept my eyes open for anything that seemed out of place. But it was hard to tell who was on her side and who wasn't. I couldn't trust anyone. I even started to question the people closest to me. Were they really allies? Or had she manipulated them too? Then, one evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing some documents, I heard a knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I approached the door, peering through the peephole. My breath caught when I saw who it was. It was her, my ex-wife, standing on the other side with an expression I had never seen before. No longer the arrogant, entitled woman I knew, but someone desperate. Her eyes were wide, wild with emotion. "I need to talk to you," she said, voice trembling. "We need to end this. For her sake. For our daughter's sake." I was frozen, unsure whether this was a trap or an honest plea. But when I opened the door, I immediately knew this wasn't just another game. Her demeanor was different. The anger, the bitterness, everything that had defined her actions for so long was gone. In its place was something far darker, more dangerous. She didn't say much more. Before, she pulled a thick envelope from her bag. Inside was a stack of papers, documents I couldn't fully make out. But one word stood out in large, bold letters. Settlement. "What is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's over," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "You've won, but not without a price. I know what you've been hiding. You've always known about me, about the affair. Now, I'll let you go, but only if you promise me something." Her eyes bore into mine, and for the first time, I felt a chill run down my spine. The game had changed. The silence in the room was suffocating as my ex-wife handed me the envelope. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Everything she'd done, every game she'd played, had led to this moment. But now, standing before me, her posture seemed different. There was no arrogance, no calculated manipulation in her eyes. She seemed tired, desperate even. "What's in here?" I asked, cautiously taking the envelope from her. "It's a confession," she said, almost whispering. "I know you're smart enough to figure this out, but I want you to hear it from me. This is the end of it, once and for all." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, shots of me, my daughter, and the private moments we had shared over the years. I scanned them quickly, trying to make sense of her twisted intentions. And then I saw it. A familiar face lurking in the background of one of the photos. It was my own brother. My blood ran cold as I processed the horrifying revelation. My own brother had been involved in the betrayal. He was the one who had helped her cover up the affair, had helped her create the false narrative that had torn our lives apart. His involvement had gone deeper than I had ever imagined. But that wasn't all. She'd been plotting this for months, manipulating everyone around her to believe that I was the one who had been unfaithful, that I was the one who had been ruining our family. It was all part of her plan to make sure I would lose custody of our daughter, to make sure she had control over everything. "Why?" I managed to choke out, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. She stepped closer, her face now just inches away from mine. "You were always the perfect man, but you weren't perfect enough. I wanted more. I wanted freedom, power, everything. You wouldn't give me that. So I took it. But now I'll let you go. You can have her, but you have to let me go too, or else everything we've built will be gone." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It was a sick game of control, a twisted negotiation, and I realized then that she had never truly cared about our family. Her love for me was always a facade, an illusion designed to keep me in her grasp while she built her empire on the ruins of my trust. But now, I had a choice to make. The stakes were higher than ever. "Is that what you really want?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. "To walk away from all this? From our daughter?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at me, her eyes full of a cold, emotionless fury. "I've made my choice. Now you make yours." That was when the final realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't negotiating. She wasn't trying to make things right. She was simply preparing to walk away from it all, leaving me to clean up the wreckage she had left behind. With that, I made my decision. I couldn't let her continue to tear my life apart. I couldn't let her manipulate me anymore. The next day, I took the first steps in filing for full custody of our daughter. But the real battle was only just beginning. The documents I had received, those photographs, the confession, and the undeniable truth would be my ammunition. I couldn't let her win. Not now. Not after everything. As the days passed, the reality of what I had just uncovered set in. My mind kept replaying the events in a never-ending loop. My wife's confession, my brother's betrayal, the sinister plot they'd spun together. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being manipulated. I had to protect my daughter, no matter the cost. The legal battle for custody wasn't going to be easy. I had already contacted a lawyer, someone I could trust to handle this war with the seriousness it deserved. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just a simple divorce. This was a fight for my daughter's future, for her safety, and for her well-being. My ex-wife wasn't going to give up easily. She had power, resources, and most importantly, she had a whole network of people on her side, including my own brother. The court hearings were tense, filled with accusations, lies, and manipulations. Every time I thought I had the upper hand, she would find a way to twist the situation, making it look like I was the bad guy. But I knew better. I had to stay calm, stay focused. There were moments when I thought about giving up, about letting her have her way and walking away from the fight. But then I would look at my daughter's face, the one thing that kept me going. And I knew I couldn't let her down. She needed me. The day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was filled with tension, the air thick with anticipation. I had my evidence. Everything from the photos and the confession to the video on my ex-wife's lover's laptop. It was all laid out before the judge. But it wasn't just about the evidence, it was about the truth. About who I was as a father and who she was as a mother. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up, looking confident, as if nothing had happened. She presented herself as the victim, as the one who had been wronged by my accusations, but I saw right through it. The facade she had spent so long building was crumbling before her eyes. Then it was my turn. I didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke for itself. I talked about the betrayal, the lies, and the harm she had caused not only to me, but to our daughter. And when I showed the video from her lover's laptop, the room fell silent. Her face turned pale. She couldn't look anyone in the eye. The guilt was written all over her, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. I had her cornered. As the judge deliberated, I felt a surge of hope rise within me. This was it, the moment I had been fighting for. The moment when the truth would finally come to light. When everything she had done would be exposed. And I would be the one standing strong, not her. When the judge finally returned with his decision, I could barely contain my emotions. He ruled in my favor. Full custody was granted to me. My ex-wife's face twisted with anger as she realized the battle was over. She had lost. Not just the custody, but her grip on everything she had tried so hard to control. And as the courtroom emptied out, I knew that this was just the beginning of my new life. A life where I would be the one in control, where I would protect my daughter and make sure she grew up knowing the truth.